Acts chapter 2, believe it or not, we're ready to move forward again. When the day of Pentecost came, now Pentecost was one of the feasts on the Jewish calendar, an important feast. It occurred 50 days after Passover. Penta 5, okay. 50 days after Passover. What had happened in that year at Passover? Well, the Friday of Passover weekend, Jesus had been crucified. He was buried Friday late afternoon, early afternoon maybe, was in the grave the rest of Friday, all day and night Saturday, and until the morning of Sunday. And then he resurrected. He was, for 40 days after that, physically present with the apostles and the believers. And so, between his ascension, and we read about in chapter 1, and this day, the day of Pentecost, there was a 10-day gap. Have you ever had to wait 10 days for something? Well, probably. But we're not wired in our culture to that 10 days would be an acceptable amount of time to wait. But don't forget, in century 1, they didn't really count time at all in the way we do. They didn't have a technology to count time the way we do. There were hourglasses, there were sundials, there was the position of the sun in the sky, but they didn't think in terms of minutes, way not in terms of seconds. They would think in terms of hours, maybe. But, and here's another thing, in all this, it factors here. How long it took to do things. What we could do 10 things in a day, and they would only be able to do one of those things in an entire day. Or maybe not even the one. So time, in a way, time has always been relative. And for them, a day was still 24 hours. They did it sundown to sun up, and sundown to sundown. Well, a 10-day span, even in a culture where everything took lots more time, and there was virtually nobody in that culture and during that time that were so tied down by the clock, because there was no clock. But even for them, 10 days is a long time to wait. But on the day of Pentecost, the day of the feast, they were all together in one place. And I suppose it's possible that it was more than the 120 that Luke records back in chapter 1. But I would say at least them. They were all together in one place. We're not sure where that one place is, but we get some hints. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. When I was doing music in Tulsa, we did one of my favorite musical things. It took more work than pretty much anything I've ever done. And it was called The Witness. And it was the story of the gospel told from the perspective of Peter. I still think wonderful music, kind of dated in the 80s, but man, it was good. And part of that musical was the day of Pentecost and how the the sound of a mighty rushing, a violent wind. And I thought, because we had this balcony, in the auditorium, and I thought, how cool. Let's get like 3 or 4 big fans and we'll point them in one direction. That wind will just circulate and it'll be blowing stuff. And then I realized it wasn't, it doesn't say there was a violent wind. It says there was the sound of a violent wind. Well, that would get, if you live in the Middle East, that would get your attention. Because, first of all, in the Middle East, there's a lot of desert. And even today, you probably read or heard accounts of these violent dust storms where the dust is blown in out of the desert and it ruins pretty much everything in its path. So if you heard the sound of a violent wind, it would have instantly got your attention. But no wind accompanied the sound. It came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. Okay. House is dwelling. And could it have been a freestanding house? Could have been. But let's keep going because there are more hints, clues. They being all of them who were in that same dwelling together, they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. Now, was it on each of the 120? Or was it only on the apostles? This is a point of debate. Of all the things to debate in terms of biblical history, seems to me there are other things maybe more important. All right, but you got to see the visual. See it in your mind. Tongues of fire. I'm kind of a pyro. I love building fires, not this time of year, but in the spring and fall and into early winter. On our back patio, we've got this, metal fire pit thing. I just love the way the flames, the tongues of the flames dance. It's mesmerizing to me. That's what they saw. And if I get it right, they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came down to rest on each of them. That's interesting. A huge special visual effect. All of them, again, are we talking 120 or 12? It's up to you. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues. Now, the actual word there in Greek is the word for languages. And in its general usage, it was actual languages. This was not just the sounds of babbling. It was not some kind of utterance, unknowable, undiscernible. These were known languages, and there's a reason for it. We're going to see it. As the Spirit enabled them, they did not stand up and decide, believe I'll speak in tongues, and go for it. No. This was done through them by the Holy Spirit. Now that, I think, is an important point of distinction. They didn't try to speak in tongues. They spoke in tongues. My personal feeling is they stood up to speak what was on their heart and in their mind because of these 10 days of waiting, and now the time had come. What would the message have been? Well, we're going to see Peter preaches the message. I think everybody would have had their own perspective, their own words for that message. In verse 5, we're picking up some more hints. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Well, yeah, because the Jewish life was built around, calendar-wise, was built around the festivals. And it was the desire of every God-fearing Jew to be in Jerusalem if they could for all of the festivals, but at least for some or one. There were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Now, does that mean literally every nation? I don't know. I think that's hyperbole to say there were people from all over the world there. When they heard the sound, again, they heard the sound, and it's not like, oh, that's curious. No, that's like in Oklahoma, when you hear the sirens blow, well, not exactly, because in Oklahoma, when you hear the sirens blow, it's supposed to indicate a tornado, but basically what most Okies do is make sure my iPhone's charged up so I can get out on the porch. And by the way, bring me a glass of iced tea so I can video whatever's going to happen. And for a lot of us, we become so accustomed to hearing those sirens go off, we don't do anything. That's not the way it was here. That sound got their attention. And a crowd came together in bewilderment. What was the bewilderment about? Because the sound was of a violent wind, but there was no wind. Because each one, here's the other thing. This also bewildered them. Each one heard their own language being spoken. That's really weird. That's like if we were to go into even a part of Berlin, for instance, away from the center of the city, the tourist part of the city. I mean, we were way out there, and everybody there was speaking English well. I'd be a little bit perplexed. So they were perplexed. They heard the sound, and a crowd came together in bewilderment. We're in verse 6. Because each one heard their own language being spoken. This leaves me with a little bit of the possibility that what they heard was their own language. And those who were speaking obviously did not know all of these languages. Is it possible that all those who were speaking were it'd be like me going to that part of Berlin and speaking English, and everybody hears it as German? Okay, I don't know. Well, in verse 7, utterly amazed, these people asked, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Which that was a little bit of a slur, because Galilee was not the classy part of Israel. And it was almost like saying, these guys are like from Godibo? What little bitty town in Oklahoma? Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Now, here's a hint. If all the people speaking were Galileans, then either this is hyperbole. It's like them saying, hey, everybody here, when it may have not been everybody here. I don't know. Or it could be specific. All these guys, we know these people are from Galilee, which would have narrowed the field. I don't think it's any problem to guess that the 120 that Luke had written about in chapter 1 were all from Galilee. I mean, that was Jesus' region of origin. I've already run out of time, so I'm going to stop. It'll be easy to pick it up next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.